Both of them briefly, they lived with us just for a little while when I was 5 years old. He died in 1927 when I would have been 5, and she died the next year, 1928. So I would have been 6 when she died. But they lived with us for a while, and they lived on the next street behind us for a while. But he had a long gray beard, and he'd get down on the floor and play with Kenny and I, pretend he was a bear chasing us, and we'd be hollering, running through the house, and he'd be having fun, acting like a bear, playing with us. But we had a fantastic family as far as...
Sorry,
What's that?
that's my phone, I'm sorry.
It's a foghorn.
Sorry about
Wow.
that. I'll turn this off and
Brief intermission.
Quantum Training Center's.
Talking about being Indian?
No, the grandfather that
Oh,
had the
yeah.
real long beard.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I was just saying that Grandpa Hill had a long beard, and he was really nice to us kids. But an interesting point, I was talking to the old-time undertaker in Hazel Park, Michigan, Mr. Ashley. He had the only funeral home in Hazel Park for a long time, and he told me that Grandpa Hill was one of his very first clients. He buried him. He took care of him when he died in 1927, and then the following year, Lenny died. They were both, if I remember right, they were only in their 60s at that time. But of course, at that time, I thought they were real old. But 60s doesn't seem so old anymore. But I think he was about 67, and she might have been a little bit younger. She died the following year, 1928. But I remember how upset that my aunts and uncles were when their mother and dad passed away. That's the first death I'd experienced. But my father's mother died when he was only a little boy. She died in, I think, 1893 or 94, I'm not sure, one of those 2 years. And he was born in 1889, so he'd have been 4 or 5 years old when she died. Then his father died in 1905, Norval. He was a Civil War veteran. He had fought with Custer at Gettysburg, and he was a great horseman. But my dad told me many stories about him. And but he died in, I think, at Central Lake in 1905. But it was interesting, some of the stories that I've heard about him. I don't know many about my dad's mother, because she died quite young, and I believe it was in childbirth. My dad was the 7th of 7 children, and I believe that the 8th was expected, and she died at that time. And I think it was 1894. Dad would have been 5 years old.
So the baby died too.
So the baby died too. And I don't know if it was a boy or girl, but my dad had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and he was the youngest. I believe I told you earlier, his brother Floyd was a great traveler, and he'd traveled to the Orient. And he died in, I believe, in Alaska. And his name was Floyd. And my oldest brother's name is Floyd Norval. And my next brother is Howard Jerome. And so my 2 oldest brothers were named after their grandfathers, their middle names.
Now, wasn't Norval, aside from being a farmer, didn't he also have a store at one time?
Yeah, he had a store up there, and I don't know where the store was, and I don't know much about it. It must have been right there near Central Lake. But he had a store, and but the story that I heard, what I recall, is that he sold so much stuff on credit that never got paid for it, and he finally lost the store. That's the story that I remember. I wish now that I'd been more curious when I was young, asked more questions from my parents. But I do remember them saying that. And I do remember my dad being he and Uncle Harrison being the foreman of the lumber camp. And up there, they called it Camp 11. It was from the East Jordan Lumber Company. And But work got scarce a few years later, and that's when I moved to Detroit. That's why Detroit grew so fast back in the teens and the 20s. The blacks moved up from the south, and lots of southern people moved up here for jobs, and the people moved from the north down to Detroit for jobs. So Detroit became quite a big city at that time. So it grew up with well over 1 million people.
Dad, what was Lenny's maiden name?
Olney, I think. I believe my grandmother Hill was, I believe her maiden name was Lenny Olney, Olney, I believe was the spelling. And his name was Jerome Hill. My mother said she was born in Paw Paw, Michigan, which is over in the western part of Michigan, over toward Kalamazoo or Grand Rapids, over that area. But she grew up in a farm, 80-acre farm north of, I have to think of that town, not Kalkaska, Mansalona. Mansalona is east of Central Lake and Bel Air. My folks were married in 1910, May of 1910 in Bel Air, Michigan. And we have a picture on the wall here of that taken in Bel Air. And then Helen's mother, my wife's mother and father were married in 1913.
Before we go into that, Dad, I'll cut this part out if you want, but could you talk about Grandpa Churchill, what you know about him?
My dad?
Yeah, your dad, and going out west, and
Yeah.
is there anything else about his life that you
Okay.
can think
And maybe
about?
if you knew how they met, or...
Yeah, okay. I don't know much about that.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, before we do that, let me go ahead and change tapes here. I just don't want to, since I have more, there's no sense in not using them.
Thank you, Michael.
So his middle name was named after his father. And he was a wonderful man. I couldn't have asked for a nicer father and mother. They were terrific. But my dad always did the best he could to provide for us. But it was trying times for that generation to have children. And the mood those days was to have large families. And my folks had 8 children. And I can't imagine having 8 children during those times, depression. When I say depression, I really mean depression. It was hard to find any money. Any money you ever had, you had to work for, and which I don't say hurt us, but there wasn't enough money to provide decent housing and for the family. But he did the best he could, and I was always proud of him. But he was very good at what he did. He was a bulldozer operator and a steam shovel operator. He worked for Frank DeVito Excavating Company in Detroit. Mr. DeVito lived on, I went to his home at different times with my dad. He lived on right near the Pershing High School in Detroit, near 7 Mile and Ryan Road. And a real nice brick home right off of 7 Mile Road. I think on Hesse Street, I think it was. And whenever there was work, DeVito got a lot of the work in Detroit. And he worked on big homes in Palmer Woods and also in Grosse Pointe. And it was fun to go to work with my father.